Hi everyone, my name is Aurelia Vilena, and I am doing my final project on I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika Sanchez. This book really caught my attention because of the way that it's different than what we had been studying in class. It focuses a lot on the Mexican family and some immigrant aspects, but it's mostly just the point of view of a girl, a 16-year-old girl who's been living in Chicago, Illinois her whole life, and it's just her trying to cope with the different cultures around her, both the Mexican and the American culture, and so that's something that's really interesting. It also helps that this book was just released in 2017, and so there aren't a lot of reviews on it. There's some interviews, and I found one by the author that was given to the author, and she explains some stuff about the book. But there aren't a lot of, really like any research done on the book or any reviews that would really help me in my research. And so I was on my own for a lot of this, and I found some articles that, or some journals that could, really help me with the things that I chose in this book. And so that's something that I really enjoyed. About the author, Erika Sanchez, she's the daughter to Mexican immigrants, and as it states here in the book, she is a poet, a feminist, and a cheerleader for young women. So that's nice that the writer, she is herself a feminist, and then she actually wants to. She states that she wrote this book, being her first novel. She wrote it to give Mexican or just Latina girls around the country a bigger voice and something that they could read to, so they could have something that they can relate to and something that gives them a voice. And so that was really interesting. She is another thing that she has published is Lessons of Expulsion, but that's just um, a collection of her poetry. And so she has always been a writer, and this is a National Book Award finalist. So it being her first novel and making it that far, it's says something really big about this novel, and I highly recommend it. So a summary of the novel is it focuses on the character Julia. They don't have last names in the book, so that's interesting. But Julia and her family have just recently lost her older sister Olga in a terrific accident, or a tragic accident, I should rather say. And she, after the death of her sister, she begins to struggle a lot because her mother doesn't see her as the perfect Mexican daughter. She would see Olga as the perfect Mexican daughter. So the book dives into her story and how she copes with all of these different problems, and how her surroundings are able to help her discover who she truly is and give her a bigger voice. Um, Besides Julia finding herself, the book focuses is about her going on this journey of trying to find out who her sister was. After her death, she finds some objects in her room that suggest that she actually had a secret life, and she actually was not the perfect Mexican daughter. And so she goes through this journey to try and find out who her sister really was. And throughout that journey, she encounters a lot of problems that make her not know who she is because her mother isn't there with her. And so that's something interesting about it. Um, Something I connected this book a lot to the literary period, contemporary trends in Chicana literature, just because of the edginess of Erika Sanchez and the way that she wrote the book. She wasn't shy about anything when she was writing, it seems like. She just wrote what came to her mind about Julia and what was going through. There's no shy things about it. Sex is included, there's gays, there's suicide, and so there's a lot of really tough topics in this book that a lot of young people, not just Latina women, but any young person can really relate to this book. And so it just helps that it's the Latina aspect to it, and how the her strict mom really plays that role for her, and because she isn't able to do what she wants to do, and so that takes a toll on her. Um, and so there was one line from the contemporary trends that I think connected to this book. It was, what has changed in the meantime is the writing of deliberately conscious essays in which the author more directly states what is on her mind, which she does, and then the subjects range from taboo issues of sexuality to identity, to a coming of consciousness, to reflection of gender and ethnicity. And so that really does connect with this book a lot, and so I highly recommend it. Um, there are, I chose two different things. So I chose a theme, and then I would say it's a topic rather than a theme. The first one I chose was the cultural differences that are found within families in the United States. Um, Coming to this country as a young kid, even, or being born in this country to, Latin American immigrants, um, it begins to take a toll on the kids just because they are growing up in a different culture that their parents grew up in. And so their parents don't understand that they can't be living in this culture at home and outside of home at all times. And so Julia in this book, she grew up in Chicago, and so she never really associated herself, with her mother's culture. She grew up in Chicago. She had the American culture and her friends and everything, and so her mom would try to take her to church, and she did not like it. Her mom, they tried to throw her a quinceañera after the death of her sister, and she just absolutely hated it. There was nothing about this culture that she wanted to be a part of. She appreciated her parents and she appreciated the culture. It's just that it wasn't who she is. It's not what defines her. And so her mother didn't understand this. And then I connected to that as well because, I was born in this country to Mexican immigrants, and they, my parents always, I grew up in San Diego for most of my life, not most of my life, but a good amount, and down there, the Mexican culture is really strong, and then when I came up to Portland, everything just changed. There's not a lot of Mexican culture up here. It's starting to grow, but when I first moved up here, it wasn't as strong, and so I grew up with this American culture, and now my parents, luckily, they do understand that in order for me to be able to be more successful, I have to fully grasp this culture, and I have, but I've never really. I appreciate the culture. I appreciate everything about it, but it's just in order to succeed, I need to leave it behind at home and then be somebody else outside, which it does mess with your identity because then you don't really know who you are. It like as a whole, you are two different people, and so I completely understand what Julia is going through in this book, with her mother blaming her for everything, and not understanding what she has to go through. Um, and there was a journal that I found that was written by Nancy Islandella and Artis Oropesa, that was published. I found on JSTOR. It's and there was one line specifically that I took from this, and it's generational patterns reflect assimilation, but they also reflect complex migration processes and identity choices that influence the composition of the various generations. So this is basically saying after generations of being here in the United States, the culture slowly starts to, the culture from your native country starts to kind of fade away, and then you assimilate yourself to the culture that is around you. And so this is what's going on in this book. Julia's parents, they grew up in Mexico, and their whole lives up until when they had their children and they moved up to Chicago, and so they don't understand that how Julia growing up in Chicago has changed her, and then Julia's children's after her, and so after the culture slowly starts to fade away, and they don't learn Spanish as as much as they should. My sister's children, they aren't learning Spanish, they're learning English because that's what's surrounding them everywhere, and that's what the language that they need in order to survive here. And so that's something that's mentioned here in the book. And then there was another journal that I found that was written by Connie Kame, and she stated that Current research with Hispanic families suggests a tendency among them to behave in a manner that is more like that of the dominant United States culture and less like that of their traditional culture. And so this was a fun journal to read just because it was a study done with Asian Americans, African Americans, and Hispanic families, and the way that in which their cultures begin to fade away because of their surroundings. And so um, because the United States culture is a lot more dominant here, we have little things here and there. We have Chinatown, um, we have some cities around that are, have the more Hispanic culture. There's, I think, Woodford has a very strong uh, Hispanic influence, and so we don't have, but those are just little parts of town that, reflect these cultures, and it's not as a whole. And so when you go to a store, everything's in English, and we have just the tiny little aisle for the ethnic foods. And so with the dominant United States culture, the traditional cultures begin to fade. And so there was a certain line in this book, and I believe it's on page 162. Yeah, after, finding out some stuff that Julia is going through, she's been lying to her mom to be able to hang out with her friends. She tells her maybe this country is ruining you, and then she goes and she blames her. She says, maybe if you knew how to behave yourself to keep your mouth shut, your sister would still be alive. So she just goes and blames her daughter for the death of her, her older daughter. And so that just doesn't, doesn't resonate well with Julia, especially with all of the problems that she's already going through. She doesn't need that to be added to the list of the identity problems. And then there's another topic that I chose also, and it's I decided to merge these three together, and it's loss and grief and identity. And just because the loss and grief that she goes through after the death of her sister, it shapes her identity. She goes through this whole journey trying to find out who her sister really is, and so this then shapes the identity that she wants to have. She wants to be a writer. She wants to go to New York. And after all of these, she, she tries to kill herself at one point because her mother just will not let her do anything. She gets really depressed after the death of her sister. Luckily, there is one strong character in this book is her teacher, her English teacher, and he is possibly the only one that supports her throughout most of the book. He tells her that she is the best writer that he's ever known, and it's that one little oomph of support to kind of keep her going, but at the same time it's not enough to keep her going, just because the people that matter the most to her are her family, and those are the ones that she's not getting the support from. And so after the death of her sister, she loses a part of her family, and so this kind of just mumbles her whole identity. And so in order for her to find her identity again, she has to go on this journey to find out who her sister was, so she has closure. And so once she finds out, the truth, her sister wasn't the perfect Mexican daughter. She had an affair. She was pregnant when she died. This gives her closure, and she is able to go to New York, after fighting and struggling a lot with her family. But she decides to keep that secret to herself in order to keep her sister's image of being the perfect Mexican daughter good for her parents. And so this book was really great choice for me, I believe. It deals with a lot of, really strong topics, sexuality, LGBTQ, suicide, identity, culture related, issues. They do a great job. She doesn't live in the greatest area in Chicago, and then she gets a boyfriend, and he's in the higher end of society. And so there's these different problems that they go through with that because of, they don't have the same social status, and so this gets a lot of problems. But in the end, it does have not the happy ending that you'd hope for, but it does have a happy ending for Julia in a way that she gets to leave the toxic past with her family. And so That's a great start. All right, thank you guys.